Samsara dava nalalida loka Tranaya karanya ganaganatvam Praktasya kalyana gunanavasya Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Mahaprabhu Kirtana Nitya Gita Paritya Madhyan Manasora Sena Romancha Kampa Shutaranga Bhaja Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Shri Vigrahara Dhananitya Nana Shingaratan Mandira Majanado Yuktasya Bhaktam Shaniyanja Topi Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Chaturveda Shri Bhagavad Prasada Swarana Triptan Hari Bhakta Sangha Krita Patriptim Bhajatasya Deva Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Shri Radhika Madhavayara Para Madhurya Lila Guna Rupa Namna Pratikshana Swadana Lolupasya Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Nikunjayuna Yaligeli Siddhai Yayali Biyukti Apekshaniya Tatati Daksha Dativalabhasya Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Sakshadaritvena Samasta Shastra Uktastatha Bhavyata Eva Sadbi Kintu Prabhurya Priyeva Tasya Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Yasya Prasadat Bhagavat Prasado Yasya Prasadat Nagati Kutopi Jayam Subham Sasya Yasya Shri Sandhyam Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda. 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 Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschasya Deshatarine. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Nila Madhav, Radha Nila Madhav, Shri Radhe. Jaya Radha Nila Madhav, Radha Nila Madhav, Shri Radhe. Jaya Jagannatha, Jaya Jagannatha, Jaya Baladeva, Jaya Subhaja. Jaya Sitaram, Jaya Sitaram, Jaya Sitaram, Jaya Lakshman Hanuman. Jaya Gauranita, Jaya Gauranita, Jaya Gauranita, Jaya Gauranita. Nitai Gaura Haribol, 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 Nitai Gaura Haribol.
ISKCON BBT Bhaktivedanta Institute founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Jai Om Vishnu Pada Paramahamsa Prajaka Acharya Ashtota Shata Shri Srimad Bhaktivedanta Grace Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava ki jai. Nama Acharya Srila Haridasa Thakur ki jai. Trinity Ho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Dadar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda ki jai. श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंद राधा कुंद गिरी गोवर्धन की जय। श्री ब्रजभूमि वृंदावन धाम की जय। श्री नवद्वीप मायापुर धाम की जय। श्री जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की जय। श्री अयोध्या धाम की जय। गंगा माई की जय। यमुना माई की जय। भक्ति देवी की जय। तुलसी देवी की जय। समावृत भक्तवृंद की जय। हरि नाम संकीर्तन की जय। गौर प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि बोल। All glory to assembled devotees. All glory to assembled devotees. All glory to assembled devotees. All glory to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. All glory to Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Namaste Narasimhaya. Namaste Dalha Dalha Daine Pral Hiranyakashi Purvakshahai Shilatanka Nakhalaye Ito Narsimha Parato Narsimha Yato Yato Yamitato Narsimha Bahir Narsimha Hridaye Narsimha Narasimham Adim Sharanam Prapadye Tava Kar Kamalavare Nakham Adbhuta Shringa Dalita Hiranyakashipu Tanuvringa Keshavadita Narahari Rupa Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare Vakara Keshavadrita Narahari Rupa Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare Keshavat Jaya Narsimhadev, 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 Jaya Narsimhadev, Jaya Jaya Prahlad Maharaj, Prahlad Maharaj, प्रहलाद महाराज जय प्रहलाद महाराज जय जय प्रभुपाद 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 जय जय प्रभुपाद जय जनताय गौर हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल निताय गौर हरि बोल गौर हरि निताय गौर प्रेमानंदे हरि बोल नरसिंहदेव भगवान की जय भक्त शिरोमणि प्रहलाद महाराज की जय श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय
वृंदाय तुलसीदेवाय प्रियाय केशवसुताय विष्णुपाक्षिपते देवी सत्यवताय नमो नमः। वृंदाय तुलसीदेवाय प्रियाय केशवसुताय विष्णुपाक्षिपते देवी सत्यवताय नमो नमः। वृंदाय तुलसीदेवाय प्रियाय केशवसुताय विष्णुपाक्षिपते देवी सत्यवताय नमो नमः। वृंदा देवी तुलसी महारानी की जय।
नमो नमः तुलसी कृष्ण प्रेयसी नमो नमः नमो नमः तुलसी कृष्ण प्रेयसी नमो नमः राधा कृष्ण सेवा पावो ए अभिलाषी राधा कृष्ण सेवा पावो ए अभिलाषी जे तुम्हार शरण लोय तारा वच पूर्ण होय कृपा कोरी कोरो तारे वृंदावन वासी मोरा ये अभिलाष विलास कुंज दियो वास नयने हरि सदा युगल रूप कृष्ण दास को ये मोरा होय दीन कृष्ण दास को ये मोरा होय श्री राधा गोविंद प्रेम सदा ये न बासी श्री राधा गोविंद प्रेमे सदा ये न बासी नमो नमः तुलसी कृष्ण प्रेयसी नमो नमः यानि कानि च पापानि प्रमहत्याधिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिण पदे पदे यानि कानि च पापानि प्रमहत्याधिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिण पदे पदे यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिण पदे पदे हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे तुलसी महारानी जय तुलसी महारानी जय तुलसी महारानी जय वृंदा देवी वृंदा देवी जय वृंदा देवी Nitya Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitya Gaura Hari Bol.
Make me follow to the Kahada.
Maharani ki jai. There are 10 fences in the matter of chanting holy names that should be avoided, and they are as follows. 1. To blaspheme the devotees who have dedicated their life for propagating the holy name of the Lord. 2. To consider name the demigods like Lord Shiva, order of the spiritual master. 4. To blaspheme the Vedic literature or the church pursuing the Vedic version. 5. To consider glorious chanting Hare Krishna to be imagination. 6. To give some interpretation to holy name of the Lord. 7. To commit sinful activities and strength of chanting holy name. 8. To consider chanting Hare Krishna one of the auspicious ritual activities, offering the Veda the fruitive activities, karma, kanda. 9. To instruct a faithless person about glorious holy name. 10. To not complete faith in the chanting holy names, and to maintain material attachments in understanding so many instructions on this matter. It is also an offense to be inattentive while chanting. Every devotee who claims to be Vaishnava must carefully guard against these 10 offenses in order to quickly achieve desired success, Krishna, Prema. Now let us offer most humble obeisances unto all the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. They are just as trees who can fulfill to everyone, and they are full of compassion for fallen, conditioned souls. Shri Chaitanya Shikshastakam ki jai, Cheto Darpana Marjanam Pavamaha Davakni Nirvapanam, Shriya Gairava Chandrika Vitaranam Vidyavatu Jivanam, Anandam Buddhivardhanam Pratipadam Purunaramita Sadhanam, Sarvatma Snapanam Param Vijayate, Shri Krishna Sankirtanam, Nam Namakari Bahuda Nija Sarva Shaktis, Tatra pita niyamita smaranena kalaha etadishi tava kripa bhagavam mamapi turudevami disham yaha janina nurakaha trinatapi sunicena tarorapi saishnuna amanina manadena kirtanya sataharihi na thanam na janam na sundarim kavitam va jagadisha kamaye Mama Jammani Jammanishware Bhavata Bhaktir Haituki Tvai Ayinanda Tanuja Kinkaram Patitam Mam Vishame Bhavam Puda Kripaya Tava Pada Pankaja Sthitaturi Satesham Vichintaya Nayanam Kaladashuru Taraya Vatanam Gadgata Rudaya Kira Pulakai Nichitam Mapur Kada Tava Nama Karhane Bhavishati Yuga itam nimishena chakshusha pravisha itam shunya itam jagat sarvam govinda virahe name ashri shava padaratam pinnastumam adarsanam marmahatam karotu va yatha tatha va vidadhatu lampato mad prananatha susa eva na paraha. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Shri Chaitanya Shikshastakam ki jai.
Glory to the
Shri Krishna Sankirtana, which cleanses the heart of all the dust accumulated for years, and extinguishes fire of conditional life, or repeated birth and death. This Sankirtan movement is prime benediction for humanity at large, because it spreads the rays and benediction moon. It is the life of all transcendental knowledge. It increases ocean transcendental bliss, and enables us to fully taste the nectar for which all is anxious. O my Lord, your holy name alone can grant all benediction human beings. Thus you have hundreds of millions of names like Krishna and Govinda. In these transcendental names you have vested all your transcendental energies. They are not even hard or fast to chanting these names. O my Lord, our kindness enables us to easily approach you by your holy names, but I am so unfortunate I have no attraction for them. One should chant the holy name of the Lord in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself lower than the straw in the street. One should be more tolerant than a tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige, and should be ready to offer all respect to others. In such a state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. O Almighty Lord, I have no desire to commit wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. Only want their constant devotional service, birth after birth. O Sahamani Nanda Krishna, I am an eternal servitor. Yet somehow I fall into the ocean birth and death. Please pick me up from this ocean of death, and place me as one as in the lotus feet. O my Lord, while my eyes be decorated with tears of love, flowing constantly when I chant your holy name, when will my voice choke up, or the hair on my body stand on end, recitation of your name. O Govinda, feeling your separation, comes a moment to be like a great millennium. Tears are flowing from my eyes like torrents of rain, and I feel all vacant in the world in your absence. I know no one but Krishna as my Lord, and he shall remain so if he handles me roughly by his embrace, or makes me broken-hearted by not being present before me. He is completely free to do anything and everything, for he is always my worshipful Lord, unconditionally.
Shri Chaitanya Siksastakam ki jai. Shri Guru Pranama prayers ki jai.
Om Agyana Timilandasya Yananjana Shalakaya Chakshum Ritam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamahyam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Shakham Vitamscha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Iti Namine Shri Varshabhanavi Devi Daitaya Kripapdaye Krishna Sambandha Vijnana Dayine Prabhavin Namaha Madhuryo Jala Premadya Shri Rupanuga Bhaktita Shri Gaura Karana Shakti Vigrahaya Namostate Namaste Gauravani Shri Murtaye Dinatarine Rupanuga Virudapa Siddhanta Dvanta Harine Namo Gaura Kishoraya Sasha Vairagya Murtaye Vipralambara Sambodhe Padam Pujayate Namaha Namo Bhakti Vinodaya Sachidananda Namine Gaura Shakti Swarupaya Rupanugavarayate Gaura Virbhava Bhumistam Yudhishta Sajana Priyaha Vaishnava Sava Bhauma Shri Jagannathaya Te Namaha Vancha Kalpatarubhischa Kripa Sindhu Bhevacha Patidanam Pavne Pyo Vaishnavi Pyo Namo Namaha Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Padayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratishin Namaha Panchatattvaatmakam Krishnam Bhakta Rupa Sarupakam Bhaktavataram Bhaktakyam Namami Bhakta Shaktikam Hey Krishna Karna Sindho Dinabandho Jagapate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Jayatam Srato Pangor Mamamanda Matirkati Masarva Swapadam Boju Radha Madana Mohano Divyat Vindaranya Kaupajumadaha Shimadranagara Singhasanasto Shimadratha Shila Govinda Devo Prishtari Sevamano Smarami Shiman Rasa Rasarambi Vamsi Vata Tatastitaha Karshan Vinu Swarner Gopir Gopinatha Shiryestanaha Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavanishwari Vishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Dadara Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare.
Shri Brahma Samhita ki jai.
Ishvara Parama Krishna Sachidananda Vigraha Anadiradi Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam Chintamani Prakara Sadmasukha Praviksha Lakshariteshu Surabi Rabi Palayantam Lakshmi Sahasra Shatasam Brahma Sevimanam Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Venum Kvanantam Aravinda Talaya Daksham Parharvatam Samasitam Buddha Sundarangam Gantarpa Koti Kamaniya Vishesha Shubham Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Alola Chantakala Savanamare Vamshi Ranangadam Panayakeli Kalavilasam Shamam Tripanga Lalitam Yata Prakasham Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Anganyasya Sakalindriya Vittimanti Pashanti Panti Karayanti Shiram Jaganti Ananda Chinmaya Satujala Vigrahasya Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Advaitam Achotam Anadi Mananta Rupam Adyam Purana Purusham Navayovanam Cha Vedeshu Durapam Maturapam Atma Bhakto Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Pantastu Koti Shatavasara Sampragamyo Vayurathapi Manaso Munipangavanam Sopyasti Yat Prapata Simya Vichinta Tatve Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Ekopi Asora Chaitum Jagadanta Kotim Yachakti Rasti Jagadanta Chayaya Tanta Antantarastha Paramanu Chayantarastham Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yad Bhava Pavitatiyo Manuchastateva Samprapya Rupa Mahimasana Yana Pusha Suktaryameva Nikama Patithaistu Vanti Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Ananda Chimmai Rasa Patipavitapi Stharpiya Eva Nijarupataya Kalapi Goloka Eva Nivasatya Kilatma Bhutto Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Premanjana Churita Bhakti Vilochanena Santa Sadeva Hidayeshu Vilokayanti Yam Shama Sundam Achintya Gunaswarupam Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Ramadi Murtishu Kalanya Mena Tishtan Nanavataram Makaro Bhuvaneshu Kintu Krishna Swayam Samabhava Paramapumam Yo Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami.
Krishna, who is known as Govinda, is the Supreme Godhead. He has an eternal, blissful, spiritual body. He is the origin of all. He has no other origin, and he is the prime cause of all causes. Haribol.
I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, the first progenitor who is tending the cows, yielding all desire, in abodes built with spiritual gems, surrounded by millions of purpose trees, always served with great reverence and affection by hundreds of thousands of Lakshmis or Gopis. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who is adept in playing on his flute, with blooming eyes like lotus petals, with head decked with peacock's feather, with a figure of beauty tinged with the hue of blue clouds, and his unique loveliness charming millions of cupids. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, round whose neck is swinging a garland of flowers, beautified with the moon locket, whose two hands are adorned with the flute and jeweled ornaments, who always revels in pastimes of love, whose graceful threefold bending form of Shamasundara is eternally manifest. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, whose transcendental form is full of bliss, truth, substantiality, and is thus full of the most dazzling splendor. Each of the limbs of the transcendental figure possesses in himself the full-fledged functions of all the organs and eternally sees, maintains, and manifests the infinite universes, both spiritual and mundane. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who is inaccessible to the Vedas but obtainable by pure unalloyed devotion of the soul, who is without a second, who is not subject to decay, he is without a beginning, whose form is endless, who is the beginning and the eternal Purusha, yet he is a person possessing the beauty of blooming youth. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, only the tip of the toe of whose lotus feet is approached by the yogis who aspire after the transcendental and betake themselves to pranayama by drilling the respiration, or by the jnanis who try to find out the non-differentiated Brahman by the process of elimination of the mundane, extending over thousands of millions of years. He is an undifferentiated entity, as there is no distinction between potency and the possessor thereof. In his work of creation of millions of worlds, his potency remains inseparable. All the universes exist in him, and he is present in his fullness in every one of the atoms that are scattered throughout the universe at one and the same time. Such is the primeval Lord whom I adore. I adore the same Govinda, the primeval Lord, in whose praise men who are imbued with devotion sing the mantra suktas told by the Vedas by gaining their appropriate beauty, greatness, thrones, conveyances, and ornaments. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, residing in his own realm Goloka, with Radha resembling his own spiritual figure, the embodiment of the ecstatic potency possessed of the 64 artistic activities, in the company of her confidants, Sakis, embodiments of the extensions of her bodily form, permeated and vitalized by his ever blissful spiritual rasa. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who is Shyamasundara, Krishna himself with inconceivable, innumerable attributes, whom the pure devotees see in their heart of hearts with the eye of devotion tinged with the salve of love. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who manifested himself personally as Krishna and the different avatars in the world in the forms of Rama, Nrisimha, Vamana, etc. as his subjective portions.
Very good. Thank you. Glorification of Srimad Bhagavatam. Ki Jai. Srimad Bhagavatam 1.1.1. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Janmadyasya yato niviyat itaratas chartesu avidya swarat tene brahma hidaya adhikavaye muyanti yat surayaha tejo varimudam yata vinimayo yatra trisargo misha damna svena sada nirasta kuhakam satyam param dhimahi. O my Lord, Shri Krishna, son of Vasudeva, O all-pervading personality Godhead, I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. I meditate upon Lord Shri Krishna because he is the absolute truth and the primeval cause of all causes of the creation, sustenance, and destruction of manifested universes. He is directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations, and he is independent because there is no other cause beyond him. It is he only who first imparted the Vedic knowledge unto the heart of Brahmaji, the original living being. By him, even the great sages and demigods are placed into illusion, as one is placed into illusion, as one is bewildered by the illusory representations of water seen on fire or land seen on water. Only because of him do the material universes, temporarily manifested by the reactions of the three modes of material nature, appear factual, although they are unreal. I therefore meditate upon him, Lord Shri Krishna, who is eternally existent in the transcendental abode, which is forever free from the illusory representations of the material world. I meditate upon him, for he is the absolute truth. Srimad Bhagavatam 1.1.2. Dharma projita kaitravotra paramo nirmatsaranam satam vedyam vastavam atra vastu shivadam tapo trayon mulanam. Srimad Bhagavate Mahamuni Krite Kimva Purir Ishwaraha Sadyo Hridi Avarudyate Tra Kriti Bihi Sususabhistakshana. Completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated, this Bhagavad Purana propounds the highest truth, which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart. The highest truth is reality distinguished from the illusion for the welfare of all. Such truth uproots the threefold miseries. This beautiful Bhagavatam, compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in his maturity, is sufficient in itself for God realization. What is the need of any other scripture? As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of Bhagavatam by this culture of knowledge, the Supreme Lord is established within his heart. Srimad Bhagavatam 1.1.3 Nigama kalpataror galitam phalam sukamukad amrita dravya samyutam pibata bhagavatam rasam alayam muhur ahor raska bhuvibhavukaha. O expert and thoughtful man, relish Srimad Bhagavatam, the mature fruit of the root, desired tree of Vedic literatures. It emanated from the lips of C. Sukadeva Goswami, therefore this fruit has become even more tasteful. Although its nectarian juice was already relishable for all, including liberated souls. Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Hari Bol. So today we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 12. And verse number 6. Sovadyata sutair evam pratyakhyatanusasanai krodam durvisaham jatam Niyantam upachakrame sa he Brahma avadayata. Thus being disrespected, sutai, by the sons, evam, thus, pratyakyata, refusing to obey, anusha, sanai, the order of their father, krodam, anger, durvisaham, too much to be tolerated, jatam, thus generated, niyantam, to control, upachakrame, tried his best. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. On the refusal of the sons to obey the order of their father, there was much anger generated in the mind of Brahma, which he tried to control and not express. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Somebody want to read?
Purport by Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Brahma is the director in charge of the mode of passion of material nature. Therefore, it was natural for him to become angry on the refusal of his sons to obey his order. Although the Kumaras were right in such acts of refusal, Brahma, being absorbed in the mode of passion, could not check his passionate anger. He did not express it, however, because he knew that his sons were far enlightened in spiritual advancement, and thus he should not express his anger before them.
So this is very interesting. We see what are called the foibles. That's a nice word, foible, F-O-I-B-L-E, I think, foible. That means shortcomings or inadequacies that people sometimes have. So Brahma, he's in charge of the mode of passion, of material nature. So when his sons refused to follow his order, he became angry. Even though he knew that they were right. What does it mean, they were right? It means that here are these young boys, and they want to remain celibate. They want to be engaged only in devotional service. They don't want to get married, have children, families, all these things. So, therefore, Brahma, who is a Prajapati, he has he has to populate the universe with living entities. So his 4 sons here who were refusing to follow his order, that was a little bit too much for him. Although he knew they were right, and therefore he got angry, but he tried to mask his anger. Now that's something that is almost impossible. So there has to be some consequence. So it says, he did not express it, however, because he knew that his sons were far enlightened in spiritual advancement, and thus he should not express his anger before them. So here we see that this is something that is going on all the time. Somebody becomes angry. Most people can't control their anger, so they just explode. But there are other people who have a little bit more self-control. They're angry, but they try and suppress it, not wanting to show it in public. But it's impossible to completely suppress. So there has to be some manifestation of it. So, therefore, it says, being absorbed in a mode of passion, he could not check his passionate anger. Well, this is the difference between sattva guna and raja guna. In sattva guna, one can control their emotions and their, let's say, situations in which they might get angry, but they have the power to control themselves. But in the mode of passion, it's almost impossible to control. You can control it a little bit, but it'll eventually explode. And in mode of ignorance, there's no way to control it all. So here we see what is the, let's call it, danger of not being in the mode of goodness and having the influence of passion and ignorance. It leads to all kinds of, let's say, unnecessary situations of anger, fighting, using bad language, etc. So, one time, whenever there's a situation where there's a tendency to get angry, and if you're in the mode of goodness, you do the following. You analyze the corollary, let's say, results if you get angry. That means before expressing your anger, first of all, you consider what effect it'll have on others and yourself. That means someone has control of their mind and their senses because they're in the mode of goodness. Most people don't have such control, unfortunately. But a devotee always considers the collateral, let's say, results if he gets upset and angry. And that is for the benefit of living a sattvic life. You never act without considering the effects it'll have on others. A very interesting point. So, in order to be able to have that composure of the mind to analyze the effect that'll happen if you become angry or if you become argumentative, or then that means that you have you are actually a genuine devotee, because you will not do anything that causes misery to others, even at the expense of accepting, let's say, a negative situation and tolerating it. So this principle of tolerance is based on understanding that Krishna is in the heart as Paramatma, and he's the supreme controller of everything. And therefore, every problem in the world will be solved through patience. Every problem. Because eventually people get old, they get sick, and they die. So there are different ways of looking at things, right? So the devotee looks at things in the sense that, what is the best course I can take to maintain Krishna consciousness? Well, I always follow the principle that if someone insults me, that person is my guru, because I have a principle. Whenever I'm insulted, I will chant more rounds that day. So actually, the person that insults you, they're actually your guru, because they're inspiring you to chant more. Right? So if you make decisions like that, you avoid most problems in life. So why? Most people say, "Oh, you insulted me, and how dare you talk like that?" And I'm going to get revenge, blah blah blah. But if you have a determination in your heart that if you get insulted, you will chant more that day. So the person that insulted you becomes like a guru. They're inspiring you to chant more. So there's always different ways of looking at things. And we see here that Brahma, he tried to control his anger, even though he knew that he was wrong. But eventually it came out anyway. And we're going to see that in the next verse. So we'll go on to the next verse now. And we'll just read the English, and who would like to read? Anybody?
Although he tried to curb his anger, it came out from between his eyebrows, and the children of
And the child?
and the child of mixed blue and red was immediately generated.
Yes. Okay, read the purport.
The face of anger is the same whether exhibited due to ignorance or knowledge. Although Brahma tried to curb his anger, he could not do so, even though he is the supreme being. Such anger in its true color came from between the eyebrows of Brahma's Rudra, in a mixed color of blue, ignorance, and red, passion. Because anger is the product of passion and ignorance.
Very good. Thank you very much. Very nicely read. Okay, so anger is the product of passion and ignorance. Now we see the value of living in the mode of goodness, where we can avoid those situations where we get unnecessarily angry and just poison the atmosphere, right? So a devotee will always think very carefully before acting, and they think about what effect their words or thoughts will have on others before they say anything. This is the life of a devotee, as opposed to the life of people living in the mode of passion and ignorance. They can't really control themselves, and they just create unending arguments and fighting and bickering. So, it says, the face of anger is the same, whether exhibited due to ignorance or knowledge. Who wants to explain what that means? It's a very, very interesting statement that Prabhupada makes here. The face of anger is the same, whether exhibited due to ignorance or knowledge. Well, they sort of breathe more heavily. It looks like they're developing some kind of redness, right? And they can't really control themselves, and they start saying things that are hurtful. Well, you must have arguments with your wife or someone, so or your co-workers, or it happens all the time. It happens every day, right? So, in the case of a devotee will consider first the collateral, let's say, effects before he or she speaks, and in the sense of anger. So, what effect it'll have on other people. Oftentimes, we lose control of ourselves and we start saying things that are very hurtful, and afterwards we end up apologizing because we were hurtful. We hurt someone by talking in that way, right? Okay, so there are 3 steps, psychological steps before action. There's thinking, feeling, and willing. So this is where Krishna consciousness can work. When there's a situation, let's say somebody insults you, okay. So you have to think, what was insulted? It's not you, because you have an eternal soul. How can that eternal soul be insulted? The temporary body may be insulted, but not the eternal soul. It can't be hurt, it can't be destroyed. So what is it that's hurt? It's the false ego. So what's actually hurt is the false ego. That means it's not me. It's something false. These are the type of thoughts that a devotee has. Do you think the materialistic people have thoughts like this? No, not at all. But you have to have some philosophical, let's say, foundation. Well, our philosophical foundation is there are 3 steps before we act. There's thinking, there's feeling, and there's willing. So Krishna consciousness can act to stop our progression from thinking to feeling to willing. So someone insults you, so you think, oh, he insulted me, what right does he have to insult me, blah, blah, blah. And then one thinks, I'll get back to that person, I'll insult them even worse. And then I must do this because I cannot tolerate being insulted by this low-class person. But the devotee will say, oh, wait a minute, it sounds like I was insulted, but actually, he didn't insult me, he insulted my false ego. But the false ego is something false, so it's not me. So why should I get upset? Just like, let's say a person is falsely accused of a crime. Now, if you know you did not do that crime, then you have nothing to worry about. Because, like one time, this is years ago in France, this one lady came up to me. She was married, and she said, "Oh," in one way or other, she said, I'm in love with you, and and I want to be with you." So I said, "Well, I'm married. You're married. I don't think it's possible." And she said, "No, no, no. We have to be alone, and we can be together." So I said, "Well, I'm not going to do anything like that, and you please excuse me." And I walked away. So the next day, I was called by the two leaders of the temple, and they said, "Well, we have knowledge that you have broken you have acted improperly with this woman." I said, "What?" And they said, she claims that you were together alone and you got involved in some kind of this thing and that thing, and she's complaining about you. I said, "Okay, let her say what time and where that happened." And I said, "And then I will answer." So they got back to her, and by questioning her a little more carefully, they realized she was lying. Right? So in other words, I did not become intimidated by that accusation, because I knew I didn't do anything. In fact, I did the right thing. I walked away. Right? So there are situations like this. So if you control yourself, then you have nothing to worry about, even if there are false accusations. If you can't control yourself, then you're going to get in a lot of trouble. So Krishna consciousness acts on the level of thinking, feeling, and willing, and stops, or we stop ourselves from going to that willing where you have to do this, right? By analyzing what is the real situation. The real situation is I have an eternal soul. Nothing can impact my soul because it's eternal. So what is actually, like if I have a toothache, I can point to it. It hurts here. But if someone insults me, can I point to where it hurts? Someone will say, "Well, it's right here." No, actually it's right here. No, actually it's right here. Right? You can't point to it because it's the false ego that was hurt. It's not the heart. I mean, if you say it's the heart, the doctor will come with a stethoscope and put it on your heart. So no, your heart's beating perfectly, right? If you say it's your mind, they'll do some scan and say, "No, everything's working perfectly in your mind." So what is it? It's the false ego. Okay. So here it says, the face of anger is the same whether exhibited due to ignorance or to knowledge. So that means, you're puffing and huffing and puffing, and you see red and blue, and your eyes are sharp and piercing. So it says, although Brahma tried to curb his anger, he could not do so, even though he is the supreme being. Such anger in its true color came from between the eyebrows of Brahma as Rudra, in a mixed color of blue ignorance and red passion, because anger is the product of passion and ignorance. So there is something called justifiable anger. When Jatayu became very angry, to see that Sita was being kidnapped by Ravana, then although Jatayu was very old and he was actually blind, he flew up into the air and challenged Ravana. And eventually, when Ravana realized that he was blind, he was able to wound him mortally. But actually that was a blessing, because Lord Ramachandra came and held Jatayu in his arms, and Jatayu, looking directly or in the arms of the Lord, died meditating on the Lord. And Prabhupada says we should all be like Jatayu. We should be willing to die to protect Sita Devi. Right? So we see, and then Jatayu is a vulture, right? Vulture's a vile type of bird, but he's actually a pure devotee. This is the glories of Lord Ramachandra and the Ramayana. It shows that even lower animals and can become, or even the worst person can become a pure devotee if they worship the Lord. Okay, so anger is destructive. There is justifiable anger. We just gave an example of it. But in general, anger is destructive, and we should avoid it at all costs, because it only leads to worse complications. But to have that control, to have that self-control, you have to have some knowledge. So there's the knowledge of thinking, feeling, and willing. There's a knowledge of what effect this will have on other people. See, this is what goes on in the mind of a devotee. He considers all these issues before acting. Whereas people who are not in control of themselves, they don't think of any of this. They just want to satisfy their desire for revenge, or as they say in Hindi, badla. You know. Yeah. Okay, so I want to divert for a minute. Yesterday we were talking about sannyas, and the verse yesterday that's quoted by Prabhupada, Devarsi Bhutat Mandrinam Pritrinam. Anyone who has completely given up all worldly relationships and has taken absolute shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord, who gives us salvation, and who alone is fit to be taken shelter of, is no longer a debtor or servant of anyone, including the demigods, forefathers, sages, other living entities, relatives, and members of human society. Thus, then the question is, oftentimes we hear that one should take sannyas and give up family, and one should not be entangled by family attraction and responsibilities, and so forth. So there's a, let's say, a person could interpret that Krishna consciousness is against family, it's against having children, etc. Well, let's hear what Prabhupada says. He wrote a letter on 15th of August, 1971, to a person, a devotee named Indira. And he says, "Please accept my blessings. I beg to acknowledge receipt of your letter. So far, your son leaving you, his parents, at 5 years, that is not necessary. Especially our Krishna conscious children, they are already living in a ashram. The children of our devotees may live with their parents perpetually, because you are all living in the temple and already engaged in devotional service. Other instructions are for those not engaged in Krishna consciousness. Any family engaged in Krishna's service is living not in this material world. Such a home is considered as Vaikuntha. That is the verdict of Bhakti Vinod Thakura. So if you are afraid of your husband's taking sannyasa, I shall not give him sannyasa order at any time. Be rest assured, your husband is already a householder sannyasi because he has no other business than to serve Krishna. You can be living peacefully with husband and children and always engaged in Krishna consciousness. One should become sannyasa by action, not by dress. In Bhagavad Gita, it is said that any person who doesn't work for himself but for Krishna only is a perfect sannyasa and perfect yogi, never mind what order he lives in. In other words, he can be brahmachari or grihastha, etc. That is the opinion of Lord Chaitanya. Okay, so this is a letter written 15th of August 1971 to Indira. Indira is probably the wife. And Prabhupada's talking about the householder sannyasi. So if the family is completely Krishna conscious, there's no necessity for the husband to take sannyas because they're already sannyasis. They've given up all illicit activities and they're only engaged in spiritual activities. There it is, proof that Prabhupada and Krishna consciousness is not against the maintenance of the family as long as all the members of the family are following Krishna consciousness. So they're already sannyasis. Right? They're living like sannyasis. There's a whole bunch of other letters like this. I'm not going to read them all. But this should put to rest any doubt about how Krishna consciousness looks at family and children and things like that. It's not a negative thing. One can be Krishna conscious in any position, whether brahmachari, whether grihastha, whether vanaprastha, or sannyas. And like Prabhupada, he was married, he had a family, but he worked very closely with his godbrother Sridhar Swami, who was a very strict sannyasi. And he gave a whole section of his house to Sridhar Swami, who needed a place where he could preach. And they lived like that. Prabhupada with his family and Sridhar Swami living in the same house. That means that there was no nonsense going on in the house of Prabhupada. Otherwise Sridhar Swami would not have stayed there. Right? So here we see there are living examples that it doesn't matter whether you're grihastha or you're sannyasi. As long as you're following Krishna consciousness, you're already sannyasi because you're not engaged in any types of unfavorable or anti-Krishna conscious activities. Okay, so are there any questions you want to ask?
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Yes, brother.
Just with a curious mind, I'm thinking about the story of Jatayu, right? And also including with the anger and false ego. How do we
There
see?
is justifiable anger.
Yes.
There is justifiable anger, and there's unjustifiable anger. Right? So we discussed both of them. Go ahead.
Yeah. So in this situation with Ravana, Jatayu is a bird. Is it possible? Like if Jatayu
Obviously,
can
he's
think,
not an ordinary bird.
yes,
Right?
but we know Ravana is more capable, and if Jatayu can hinder Ravana from the journey, then the purpose of Lord Rama is not met. So in this situation, even Jatayu can control the anger and see the future. If we think in that perspective, like even Lord Hanuman, he went to Lanka. Instead of him, he even though he is capable, we know Hanuman is capable, and he can defeat Ravana. He didn't choose to so. So in this perspective, how do we justify anger that Jatayu had? Just curious, with a curious mind, I'm asking Maharaj not to
Well, okay.
defy.
Let's talk about an example. Let's say you and your wife and your kids are in Disneyland. All right? You went to Disneyland. And then two drunk men come up to you, grab your wife, grab your kids, and start walking away with them. And your wife starts screaming, and the kids start crying. What would you do?
Our natural tendency is to do that, but we forget to assess our strengths.
What would you do? Say it.
Our natural tendency is to fight them or try to protect. Not doesn't have to be fight, but how in those situations, how do we self-evaluate whether we can?
You would be ready to fight.
Yes, Maharaj.
Right? But that's justifiable. Your duty is to protect your wife and children. You can't say, oh, well, I'll just get another wife and kids.
So in this situation, like let's say there are two people with guns, we evaluate our, like, how do we evaluate? We evaluate, our chance of winning. And then, we get shot and then anyhow the purpose is lost. There, we lose them as well as we lose life. And maybe if we think even faster way, maybe we could find a better way to, like in Jatayu, maybe the Jatayu could have tracked.
Be more realistic. If you see someone, even if they have a gun, and they're hurting your wife and your kids, you're not going to just stand there and say, well, that's life. No, you're gonna do something. You're gonna risk your life to save the life of your wife and kids. So Jatayu, when he saw Sita, wailing and being kidnapped by Ravana, he became extremely angry, and immediately he went to try and save her, even though he was old and he was blind. And Prabhupada says we should all be like Jatayu, ready to die to save Sita Devi. Okay?
Thank you, Maharaj.
Yeah. Now don't go to Disneyland. Haribol. Any other questions? Yes.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Yes.
Does Krishna ever get angry, Maharaj?
Does he get angry? Well, he had to be angry to want to kill Ravana, right? And he had to be angry on the Battle of Kurukshetra, right? When he saw that Arjuna was going to be killed by Bhismadevs, and when the chariot was destroyed, he picked up one of the wheels and ran with the wheel, swirling in his hand like a chakra to kill Bhisma. So he must have been angry, right? So but that's called justifiable anger. Okay? Yeah. So there are justifiable situations of anger. Not all situations are justifiable anger, but there are justifiable situations. Any other questions?
So, Maharaj, in contrast, Arjuna was somewhat in Sattva-guna when he was initially contemplating on the consequences of not fighting the war versus fighting the war. In Bhagavad Gita.
No,
Is that true?
No.
So what was the mood or what was the
How
conflict?
can it be in Sattva Guna if he's rejecting a direct order of Krishna.
So yeah.
So I mean, let's say your son. You ask your son. You say, "Look, I think you should not go to college. In Timbuktu, but you should go to college in Seattle." And he said, "No, I'm not going to do that." So is he in the mode of goodness when he says that to his father? No. He's challenging. He's not respecting the opinion of the father. So you can't say that, although what Arjuna used as argument not to fight sounded good, and maybe in some situations it would be acceptable. But in that particular situation where Krishna is giving him a direct order, it means that he has some sense gratification. And because of that, he's not able to accept the direct order of Krishna. So he's not in the mode of goodness, in the mode of ignorance. Yeah. So these are things that we learn gradually. Here's Arjuna is giving very, very, let's say, impelling arguments why not to fight. But he's masking his real motive. He doesn't see how he will be happy. But is that the criterion? No. He should see what makes Krishna happy. You see, that's what the devotee's acting all the time for the happiness of the Lord. But if he acts only for his own happiness, that's sense gratification. So that cannot be accepted as bona fide. Whereas in other situations, the things that he said, they might be pertinent, but in this particular situation where he's face to face with the Lord and outright refusing to follow the instruction of the Lord, there's no excuse for that. It's because of his attachment to sense gratification.
So I was thinking that maybe there is a angle of sattva guna versus shuddha sattva, that Arjuna may be in the material sattva guna, which is what most of the materialists also say, or just being good is sufficient without accepting the spiritual dimension. Versus that's probably, at least my understanding was that Arjuna was thinking more in the material sattva guna. But then, eventually, when Krishna gives him the higher dimension, that's when he understood there is the transcendental sattva guna, wherein, I just wanted you to help clarify whether he was in the mode of passion and ignorance, or was he in the mode of maybe material goodness, but not in the transcendental goodness?
Oh, let's look at what is in the Bhagavad Gita here. So Krishna says in the 2nd chapter, 3rd verse, O son of Pritha, Arjuna, do not yield to this degrading impotence. It does not become you. Give up such petty weakness of heart and arise, O chastiser of the enemy. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Arjuna was addressed as the son of Pritha, who happened to be the sister of Krishna's father, Vasudeva. Therefore, Arjuna had a blood relationship with Krishna. If the son of a Kshatriya declines to fight, he is a Kshatriya in name only. And if the son of a Brahmana acts impiously, he is a Brahmana in name only. Such Kshatriyas and Brahmanas are unworthy sons of their fathers. Therefore, Krishna did not want Arjuna to become an unworthy son of a Kshatriya. Arjuna was the most intimate friend of Krishna, and Krishna was directly guiding him on the chariot. But in spite of all these credits, if Arjuna abandoned the battle, he would be committing an infamous act. Therefore, Krishna said that such an attitude in Arjuna did not fit his personality. Arjuna might argue that he would give up the battle on the grounds of his magnanimous attitude for the most respectable Bhisma and his relatives. But Krishna considered that sort of magnanimity mere weakness of heart. Such false magnanimity was not approved by any authority. Therefore, such magnanimity, or so-called nonviolence, should be given up by persons like Arjuna under the direct guidance of Krishna. So here we see that Arjuna is not only the friend of Krishna, he's a Kshatriya. He's been trained his whole life to protect the principles of Dharma. And here we are on a battlefield where there's a whole side of the battle, the warriors, that are adharmic. And Arjuna wants to walk away from it? So this had nothing to do now with anything else. He's been trained to do this. It's like a policeman. If someone is strangling your wife, and you call the police, and the policeman comes, he says, "What's going on?" He said, "Oh, there's a man in the bedroom, and he's strangling my wife. Please go there and save her." He says, "Okay." He takes his gun out and walks into the bedroom with the gun. And then he comes back out again and puts the gun back in his holster. And the husband said, "Well, what happened?" He said, "Well, yeah, I went in there, and you're right. Yeah, he is strangling her." He said, "Okay, but what did you do?" He said, "Well, I can't really do anything because the man strangling your wife is my brother. And when my mother died, I promised I would never do anything to hurt him. So I'm going to go call another policeman." He said, "Wait a minute. By the time the other man comes, my wife will be dead." He said, "Well, I can't help that. Sorry." Now, is that acceptable? No, it's nonsense. So that's basically what Arjuna is doing. He's violating his vow as a Kshatriya to protect the principles of Dharma. So Krishna said, "Look, we're not only you are a great warrior, but we're also related. And it's not becoming of you to act in such a way. It's a violation completely of your family values, the part of the glorious family of Krishna, right? And of your responsibilities in life." So his refusing the fight was a very serious mistake. Go ahead.
Yeah, so now I understood. So because he's not following even the dharma that he was supposed to do, he's not definitely in mode of goodness.
Yeah, exactly.
He's in ignorance.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
So that's third verse of the second chapter. Haribol.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Yes.
We get angry only when there is an expectation, right?
When there's what?
Expectation. Because in Brahma's situation, he expected the Kumaras to propagate, but because it didn't happen, and that's what happens to us too, because we expect something and it's not going in favorable of what we think, the anger rises. So how do we, because everyone who gets anger justifies somehow or other that my anger is valid, but how do we draw lines, like what is acceptable, what is not?
Well, it's based on principles of Krishna consciousness. No meat eating, no gambling, no illicit sex, no intoxication, following the rules and regulations of Krishna consciousness. So, if your family member, begins to drink alcohol, I hope not, right? But let's give an example like that. So that would be a serious violation of Krishna consciousness going on in your house, right? So what do you do?
Definitely get angry and and reestablish as much as I can with even force, if that needs to
Well,
be.
you might not get angry, but you would try and find some way to reason with the family member who's taken up this horrible, sinful activity. Right? You don't have to necessarily get angry, but you would try and convince them. Just like when Vasudeva just got married, and then Kamsa is driving, Vasudeva and Devaki to their family home, and all of a sudden, Kamsa hears that the eighth son of Devaki is going to kill him. So then he wants to kill Devaki. So did Vasudeva get angry? Right? He did not get angry. But he tried to reason with him. And because Vasudeva did not get angry, and because Vasudeva is an honest person, has a very big, very high level of reputation as an honest person, somehow or other he was able to convince Kamsa not to kill his wife on the basis of his promise that every child that was born he would bring them to Kamsa, and Kamsa could do whatever they wanted and whatever he wanted to do. So that's a different way of convincing someone, right? Without getting angry.
Mm.
If he got angry, there would have been a fight, and probably Kamsa would have killed him also and his own sister. So there are other ways of dealing with these type of situations. Okay? And these are examples, right?
Yeah.
He didn't get angry. He reasoned with them, in the mode of, and the fact that he had such a reputation. Right? That's another thing. If someone is a drunkard, how can he convince another person to act in a mode of goodness? No one's going to believe him because he himself is not in the mode of goodness. So that's why it's important to always be a genuine devotee and have a reputation of keeping your word, of being honest. Right? Then you're able to convince people. And if you don't have a reputation like that, why should people believe you? So therefore, becoming a genuine devotee is the solution to all the problems of life. Haribol. Yes.
This is a very hard subject for us to. Now we have the two contrasts, extreme contrast, Vasudeva versus Jatayu. So even Vasudeva, his children being killed in front of him.
Yeah.
He didn't choose to fight.
Yeah.
So, like I was trying to see how do we choose one or the other in times like this. Even in Vasudeva's case, it's his own children getting killed in front of him.
Well, did he get angry?
If he gets angry, it's a justifiable anger, right? Because it's his children Kamsa is going to kill. It's better to be killed than seeing his own children to get killed.
Well, it's not an easy thing, you see. It's not an easy thing. But it was part of the plan of Krishna. There was a reason why those 6 boys were killed. You have to read,
Yes. Yes, Maharaj. But as ordinary people like me, how do we make this kind of decisions?
Well, your name is not Vasudeva. Right? So, if anyone tries to kill one of your kids, you have to protect them.
That's all right. Okay. Hare Krishna.
There's a big background of why those 6 kids were killed.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, Maharaj.
Yeah. So just stick to your particular situation. Your particular situation is you can't lose control of yourself, whether it's with your wife, with your kids, with your coworkers, with your neighbor, whatever. You can't, because it's just going to poison the situation worse. You have to have control of your mind and your senses, and you have to make decisions, not snap decisions, but you have to make decisions based on careful thought of what the result would be if you do this or that. You have to see what the effect will be. So let's say your wife says something that you don't like. So your first thought is, oh, I'm not going to let her get away with that. But then your second thought is, well, wait a minute, if I say something, it'll only get worse. So let me just keep quiet and not make the situation worse, right? So you have to think, what's going to be the effect if I do something before you do it. That means, so even Arjuna, now look, let's go back to the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where Prabhupada says, okay, so in the first chapter, text number 43, it says, O Krishna, maintainer of the people, I have heard by disciplic succession that those who destroy family traditions dwell always in hell. Okay? And in the purport, Prabhupada says, Arjuna bases his argument not on his own personal experience, but on what he has heard from the authorities. That is the way of receiving real knowledge. One cannot reach the real point of factual knowledge without being helped by the right person who is already established in that knowledge. He's talking about guru there, right there. There is a system in the Varnashram institution by which, before death, one has to undergo the process of atonement for his sinful activities. One who is always engaged in sinful activities must utilize the process of atonement called prayaschita. Without doing so, one surely will be transferred to the hellish planets to undergo miserable lives as the result of sinful activities. And then Arjuna says, alas, how strange it is that we are preparing to commit greatly sinful acts. Driven by the desire to enjoy royal happiness, we are intent on killing our own kinsmen. Purport. Driven by selfish motives, one may be inclined to such sinful acts as the killing of one's own brother, father, or mother. There are many such instances in the history of the world, but Arjuna, being a saintly devotee of the Lord, is always conscious of moral principles and therefore takes care to avoid such activities. Then he says, better for me if the sons of Dhritarashtra, weapons in hand, were to kill me unarmed and unresisting on the battlefield. And then purport, it is the custom, according to Kshatriya fighting principles, that an unarmed and unwilling foe should not be attacked. Arjuna, however, decided that even if attacked by the enemy in such an awkward position, He would not fight. He did not consider how much the other party was bent upon fighting. All these symptoms are due to soft-heartedness resulting from his being a great devotee of the Lord. Well, now, see, the balance is going up and down now. See? And then the next verse says, Sanjaya said, Arjuna, having spoken on the battlefield, cast aside his bow and arrows and sat down on a chariot, his mind overwhelmed with grief. While observing the situation, that is the purport, while observing the situation of his enemy, Arjuna stood on a chariot, but he was so afflicted with lamentation that he sat down again, setting aside his bow and arrows. Such a kind and soft-hearted person in the devotional service of the Lord is fit to receive self-knowledge. So then, in the second chapter, first verse, it says, Sanjaya said, seeing Arjuna full of compassion, his mind depressed, his eyes full of tears, Madhusudana, Krishna, spoke the following words. Okay, so now pay real attention here. Material compassion, lamentation, and tears are all signs of ignorance of the real self. Compassion for the eternal soul is self-realization. The word Madhusudana is significant in this verse. Lord Krishna killed the demon Madhu, and now Arjuna wanted Krishna to kill the demon of misunderstanding that had overtaken him in the discharge of his duty. No one knows where compassion should be applied. Compassion for the dress of a drowning man is senseless. A man fallen in the ocean of nations cannot be saved simply by receiving his outward dress. Huh? To what?
By rescuing his outward.
Oh, okay. By rescuing, a man fallen in the ocean of nations cannot be saved simply by rescuing his outward dress. The gross material body. One who does not know this and laments for the outward dress is called a Sudra, or one who laments unnecessarily. Arjuna was a Kshatriya, and this conduct was not expected from him. Lord Krishna, however, can dissipate the lamentation of the ignorant man, and for this purpose the Bhagavad Gita was sung by him. This chapter instructs us in the self-realization by analytical study of the material body and the spirit soul, as explained by the Supreme Authority, Lord Shri Krishna. This realization is possible when one works without attachment to fruitive results and is situated in the fixed conception of the real self. Okay, so you can read this, you'll see that Arjuna is a good person, he's compassionate, all that, but he was compassionate on the level of the body, not the soul. Therefore, Krishna did not accept all his good statements. They were all good statements, but he didn't accept it because it was on a false basis. Okay? So that's why we should very slowly and very seriously read Bhagavad Gita. But Arjuna is a good person because he's considering the result of his actions on others before acting. Right? At least he's doing that. But it's on a false basis because he's hiding his real motive. His real motive is he doesn't see how he will be happy. He's not thinking about how Krishna will be happy. So that's his mistake. Okay? Haribol. All glory to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Somebody could sing?
Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakati Sadma Bandhu moi savadhana mate Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakati Sadma Bandhu moi savadhana mate Bandhu moi savadhana mate Jahara prasade bhai e bhava kuriya jai Krishna prapti ho jaha hote Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chitte te koriya kya Arana kori ho mane asha Arana kori ho mane asha Shri Guru Charane Rati Aise Uttama Gati E prasade pure sarva asha E prasade pure sarva asha चक्षुदान दिल जे जन्म जन्म प्रभु से दिव्य ज्ञान हृदय प्रकाशितो प्रेम भक्ति जहा होते अविद्या विनाश जायते वेदे गाय जहर चरितो Shri Guru Karuna Sindhu Adhama Janara Bandhu Shri Guru Karuna Sindhu Adhama Janara Bandhu Lokena Lokera Jivana Prabhupada, 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 Srila Prabhupada. Jayo Prabhupada, 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 Srila Prabhupada. Jayo Jayo Prabhupada, 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 Jayo Jayo Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Gurudev, 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev. Srila Prabhupada ki.
Radha Krishna Govardhana Sam Kundarada Giri Govardhan Sri Vrindavan Dhan Mayapura Dhan Jagannath Puri Dhan Tulasi Devi Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Ganga Maya Ki Jai Jamuna Maya Ki Jai Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai and entire Gaura Premanande. All glories to Samaveda, all glories to Samaveda, all glories to Samaveda, all glories to Shri Guru and Shri Guranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, Patita Bhavani Ki Jai. Namaste, the lotus feet of our spiritual master are the only way by which we can attain the pure devotional service. I bow down to his lotus feet with great awe and reverence. By his grace, one can cross the ocean of material suffering and obtain peace. I only wish to have my consciousness purified by the words emanating from his lotus feet. Attachment to his lotus feet is perfection, which fulfills all desires. He opens my darkened eyes and fills my heart with transcendental knowledge. He is my Lord, birth after birth. From him ecstatic flame emanates, by him ignorance is destroyed. The Vedic scriptures sing of his character. Our spiritual master is social mercy, defended before the Lord's master of the Lord. O Master, be merciful to us. Give us the shade of lotus feet. Your fame is spread all over the world. We take shelter of lotus feet. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Go to Premanandi.